Hello, a very good morning to you. Railway workers from the RMT union begin a fresh 48-hour strike this morning in a long-running dispute over pay, working conditions and job security. Significant disruption is expected, with passengers told to avoid travelling by train if at all possible. Well, talks with the government last night were unable to avert the walkout, although there was a glimmer of hope after another union, the TSSA, accepted a pay offer from Network Rail. So let's take a look at this 48-hour strike. It's going to affect Network Rail and 14 operating companies nationwide. Just a fraction of scheduled trains will be running. To give you a sense of the disruption, only 1 in 5 trains ran in the most recent strike. As a result, some services will start later and finish earlier, with some areas going without any train services whatsoever. Well, our political correspondent, Rob Powell, is here with me now. So another 48-hour rail strike begins. There were talks last night, but clearly no breakthrough.
Yeah, and this time in the weekend before Christmas, so crucial days for hospitality, for shops, for retail as well. 1 in 5 trains running. As you say, Hugh Merriman, the rail minister, had some last-minute talks with the RMT last night. That hasn't averted these strikes. It doesn't seem to have produced anything. The RMT said last night, though, that the minister had requested more talks and that they were open to that, so those are being scheduled. So the two sides are still talking. At the same time, as you mentioned, other unions which represent workers who work in Network Rail, so on the track, infrastructure, engineering, control rooms, things like that, they have accepted the offer that is on the table from Network Rail. So the TSSA and Unite members have accepted that. That is the same offer that RMT members rejected, a 63% rejection on about an 80% turnout last week. So even though I think people will be waking up thinking, golly, more strikes, it does feel like we are maybe edging towards a place where potentially there is a deal to be done. I think it is talking to people in the RMT, though, they say it is not necessarily the pay, but some of the conditions and some of the redundancies that are coming alongside this package that are the sticking points here, essentially. Of course, even if the government can get that over the line, it is also locked in negotiations with other unions in other sectors as well. Yesterday, we saw that nurses strike, the first time a strike of that breadth had taken place in the RCN's history over 100 years. And on that, it feels like relations between the government and the RCN, if anything, have deteriorated this week. On Monday night, we saw those last-minute talks. They ended really in bitterness, with the Royal College of Nursing accusing the government of turning their back on nurses. The government hasn't changed position this week. It is still saying it won't be reopening the pay settlement for nurses. So at the moment, that looks to be a continuing standoff, with another strike due for next week, and then ambulance worker strikes as well on the 21st and the 28th of December. One bit of good news this morning, though, baggage handlers at Heathrow that were due to go on strike today, they are considering a new offer, so that strike for today has been suspended.
Yeah, but as you say, plenty of others are still on the calendar at the moment. Rob, thanks very much indeed. Well, yes, so another day of strikes, but as we were saying, plenty more to come. So let's take a look at them. On top of this 48-hour strike, there will be more rail walkouts on 4 days around Christmas, as well as in January. After yesterday's strike, nurses from the Royal College of Nursing in England and Wales will walk out again next Tuesday. And more NHS disruption as ambulance staff, including paramedics, emergency care assistants and call handlers, striking on the 21st and the 28th of the month. Postal workers will stage another 2-day strike from the 23rd of December. Border Force staff will strike from the 23rd of December to the 26th, and then again from the 28th to the 31st. And driving test examiners and some civil servants will also go on strike this month. Now, 4 people are in a critical condition after reports that a large crowd attempted to force its way into a concert at the O2 Academy in Brixton in South London last night. So let's get the latest then. Sky's Milena Veselinovic joins me now from Brixton. So, Milena, what do we know about this incident?
Well, what we know is that the police were called at 9:35 p.m. last night after reports of a crowd trying to force their way into the O2 Academy in Brixton. London Ambulance Service also attended, so did the London fire brigade. Now, 8 people were treated. 4 of them are still in hospital in a critical condition. 2 people with lighter injuries were treated right here. Now, as you can see here behind me, the cordon still in place. Police officers still on scene. Investigation is underway, but no one has been arrested yet. Now, the Met Police have released a statement about this incident. The statement is by the Met Police Gold Command Ade Adelakan, and it says, "This is an extremely upsetting incident which has left 4 people critically ill in hospital. My thoughts and prayers are with them and their families." It goes on to say, "A police investigation has been launched and it will be as thorough and as forensic as necessary to establish exactly what happened last night. Officers are remaining in the area to provide reassurance to the local community in and around Brixton. If you have any information or concerns, please speak with them." Now, there's a number of social media videos circulating. They show a large number of people in front of the venue, some of them trying to force their way in, some of them confronting the police officers. There's also a side street with what looks like packed with hundreds and hundreds of people. Now, the artist who had his performance here, Nigerian artist called Ashake, he tweeted in hours before the concert that it was sold out. Now, it's unclear if people who turned up here thought that they could get tickets on the night or they were hoping to get a glimpse of him. Nonetheless, 4 people critically ill in hospital and an incident where investigation is underway.
Milena, thanks very much indeed. Well, let's just bring you some breaking news now on the economy, and the latest retail sales figures have just been released, giving an indication of consumer confidence in the run-up to Christmas. So let's find out what those figures tell us. Our business correspondent Adele Robinson joins me now from Reading. So, Adele, how's it looking? What's the picture as far as retail sales concerned?
Well, I'm afraid it's not looking good. In fact, it's below what was expected. Forecasters expected that there would be a 0.3% rise in retail sales volumes. It's actually down by 0.3%, so clearly not good news. And this off the back of a rise in retail sales volumes in October. That was described at the time as a bounce back, a flash dawn after the bank holiday for the Queen's funeral in September. Sales, though, are still well below pre-pandemic levels across all months, even though there was that rise in October, and well below what they would normally be at this time of year for November as well. So what it shows is inflation is still really squeezing households hard off the back of the Bank of England's decision to raise interest rates by 5 basis points yesterday. I guess that could have been worse, it could have been higher, but still really difficult for people with mortgages. Let's look a little bit further into the detail of those figures out today from retail sales. They do include Black Friday, but they don't include Cyber Monday. So that could skew it a little bit, although it's a fall still. Online sales were down by 2.8%. Non-food purchases also down. And the only area to rise was food. That was up by 0.9%. But the thinking is that people are really trying to stock up on food ahead of Christmas. So there's no winter cheer here. The retailers that we've spoken to in the last couple of days have actually said that the strikes, politics aside, are not helping them because, of course, it decreases footfall here in the shops, and the strikes with Royal Mail as well, deliveries too. So people any travel disruptions going to affect those sorts of things. And of course, this is the busiest time. It's supposed to be the busiest time of year for retailers. On the ground, consumer confidence, the Consumer Confidence Index is out today as well. That's up 2 points, up a little bit, I suppose, but it's still at historic lows. So that's not good in the days before Christmas, and it's unlikely that we'll see a rebound in confidence anytime soon.
It's a pretty sobering picture, isn't it? Adele, thanks very much indeed. Do stay with us. We've got lots coming up for you on the show this morning, including the chair of the Labour Party, Annalise Dodds, will be with me shortly after 8 o'clock. As another rail strike causes disruption nationwide, we'll be joined by the head of the RMT union, Mick Lynch. And signed, sealed, delivered. We'll hear the post office's tips on making sure your Christmas parcels will get there on time. £11.4 billion. Now, the government has named 400 schools which are set to benefit from renovation projects. However, statistics analysed by Sky's data team shows that it would cost £11.4 billion to make the repairs needed to fix the problems in Britain's crumbling schools. And yet it appears there's less than half that in the budget. Sky's Ali Fortescue reports.
It soaks up and then gets that heavy that they come through the ceiling and they collapse.
It's not a tour any headmaster wants to give to a journalist, but at Russell Scott Primary on the outskirts of Manchester, they need help.
These are a couple of weeks old, and this is happening every time we have a downpour. This is what happens. One of the problems that we've had is that there are internal manholes throughout the building. And they've lifted up, and sewage has come out from these manholes.
What, like here?
Yeah, into the classrooms.
After leaks and floods, raw sewage floating in classrooms, today the government's announced that this school will be rebuilt. It's welcome news, but won't make up for the last 8 years.
We're in an area that is socially deprived, and so the pressures that are borne by communities like ours are high. Sleepless nights and all that, because you've got all these children who depend upon you, you've got staff in the school who depend upon you, and if you make the wrong call at the wrong times, it's them that will pay the consequence.
It's not just this school. Research published last year estimates that the cost of fixing schools in need of repair would run to £11.4 billion, and capital spending on education is half what it was at its peak in 2010. The fifth Education Secretary this year says more money is coming.
I think you've always got a value for money question. You've always got to look at what's required. We understand that we've got these challenges, but to be focused on and singled out in the budget as one of the areas for investment, then that's something that I think a lot of Education Secretaries would have liked in the past as well.
We spoke to others with extraordinary stories of crumbling classrooms and buildings falling into disrepair. They didn't want to be named for fear it would impact any funding decision.
It is the Cinderella. It has been neglected, and if we genuinely do care about our future, not just of our children, but surely our economy, investment has to happen, and it has to happen now.
But fixing schools badly in need of repair, making up for the lost COVID years, won't be easy or cheap. Ali Fortescue, Sky News.
As expected, Labour has won comfortably in the Stretford and Urmston by-election. Andrew Weston held the seat for Labour, increasing his party's share of the vote by 10%, although turnout was less than 26%.
This is an appalling result for Rishi Sunak, and it really is a strong, strong Labour result. This is a reflection, really, of the Tory vote in freefall. It's not entirely a surprise based on what I've been hearing on the doorstep, but what we need to remember is that this constituency, a third of its councillors just 4 years ago were Conservative.
Well, our political correspondent, Mari Aurora, is in Stretford in Greater Manchester for us this morning. So, Mari, it sounds like a pretty easy win for Labour here.
Yeah, I think it was an easy win for Labour. I think no one is surprised on either sides that they won this, and they won this quite easily as well. Now, I think what was interesting about this election was the turnout was actually quite low. It was under 26% turnout. Obviously, that to an extent is probably to do with how freezing cold it is and people not wanting to go out. But also, I think perhaps maybe feelings around the government's actions at the moment, and maybe we know it's a relatively safe Labour seat. People maybe didn't feel the need to leave their homes in the cold for it. But I think it is disappointing for Rishi Sunak. I think even though it was an expected loss, at the same time it would have been a slightly better news for Rishi Sunak this morning had they won, had they essentially lost slightly less. But also, I think Keir Starmer will be very pleased with this result. They've had that 10% swing from the Conservatives over to the Labour Party. And also what's really interesting is the other smaller parties, the Lib Dems, the Greens, who came in third and fourth, they have really not done very well. And so it does suggest that those parties aren't stealing votes from the Labour Party, which will be very good news for Keir Starmer. But I mean, if we look at the numbers, so the Labour Party got 12,828 votes, which was almost 70% of the vote share, whereas the Conservative Party, their vote share went down to 2,922, which was just under 16% of the vote share. So a decent drop for the Conservative Party. Party. I think also we've got to remember we've got those May local elections coming up. A lot of Tory MPs are very anxious about that, especially Tory MPs in the Red Ward on very small majorities who are worried about the next general election. So this potentially could be a kind of pointer toward how we could see the local elections going. But as you say, there were no surprises in this by-election. Labour were very much expected to win. So I think for now, Keir Starmer will be very pleased. Rishi Sunak, not very surprised. But the question is, there's another by-election in early 2023 in West Lancashire. How will that go? And will that be a third defeat for Rishi Sunak within his premiership?
Yeah, interesting times. Mari, thanks very much indeed. So let's take a look now at some of the day's other headlines. And at least 16 people have died and more than a dozen others are missing after a landslip ripped through a tourist campsite in Malaysia. The search for survivors is ongoing, with almost 400 rescue workers at the site in the outskirts of the capital, Kuala Lumpur. The US National Archives has released thousands of documents on the murder of the President John F. Kennedy for the first time. The White House says that more than 97% of records in the collection are now publicly available. No huge revelations are expected from the papers, but historians hope to learn more about the alleged assassination. Tax dodging and non-compliance during the pandemic cost the government £9 billion. The National Audit Office says it came as HMRC moved thousands of tax compliance staff to COVID support schemes, reducing its capacity to investigate people and businesses not paying the right amount. Hospital admissions for flu cases have overtaken COVID-19 admissions for the first time since the start of the pandemic. Flu admissions nearly doubled last week, jumping to 6.8 per 100,000 people. That's the highest level in 5 years. COVID-19 cases are also rising, but at a slower rate. Twitter has suspended the accounts of several journalists who've been covering the social media site and its new owner, Elon Musk. Reporters from The New York Times, Washington Post and CNN are amongst those subject to the ban. Virgin Atlantic will operate the world's first net-zero transatlantic flight. The airline has secured £1 million of government funding to fly a Boeing 787 jet from London to New York next year using sustainable aviation fuel instead of kerosene. It'll be produced from waste oil and fats. Today is the last recommended day to post cards and gifts first class for them to arrive by Christmas. The Post Office says due to industrial action by postal workers, the last day for second-class deliveries to arrive in time for Christmas Day, I'm afraid, has now passed. Now, Prince George and Princess Charlotte stole the limelight as they joined their parents for a Christmas Carol concert last night. So the royal family were at Westminster Abbey for the carol service. There they are. This was a concert where the Princess of Wales joked about her singing talents with the star guests there. And the concert came just hours, of course, after the final parts of the Sussexes documentary dropped on Netflix. Well, during the service, Prince William read an extract from the late Queen's 2012 Christmas message talking about togetherness. So, more strikes and another by-election loss for the Conservatives. But just how damaging is it for the government? Plenty to discuss here with the Conservative peer and pollster, Lord Hayward, who joins me now. Welcome to you. A very good morning to you. Let's start with the by-election, shall we? Stretford and Urmston, already a Labour seat, but the Tories have seen a big cut in their share of the vote, haven't they? So should they be worried at all by that?
Yes, clearly they should be. But this is one of those results, and Mari gave a very good analysis just now, where the result itself is no surprise. Each of the parties can say, well, it was good for us. Labour got to 70%, and that's a very challenging figure. The Conservatives went down by 12%, which is actually less than the opinion polls were indicating. And there's a smaller swing than 2 weeks ago at the Chester by-election, which we discussed here. So it's disappointing, but not bad for the Conservatives, pleasing for the Labour Party.
Very low turnout. Often you see protest votes at by-elections mid-term, don't you? So how much can we read into this as far as a general election is concerned?
Very little. By-elections, as you say, people register protest votes. If you look back at swings in other parliaments. Swings in this parliament, I've just referred to Chester, we've had Wakefield. They were larger swings than this swing against the government. This is mid-range, and in most cases, the seats then revert back to the party that held it previously if they change hands. So nothing astonishing in relation to this swing, quite normal.
Will some of the Tory MPs nearby, Sir Graham Brady, for example, very close by, will they be feeling a little bit anxious?
I think Sir Graham and other local MPs will be feeling anxious because of problems in terms of local elections that have been going on for several years. There's been a trend away from the Conservatives in that belt of South and West Manchester. So, yes, they will be concerned, but as Murray indicated, you've got the local elections next May and people will be looking, has the government solved the industrial relations issues? Is inflation coming down? It started coming down this week. Is the government considered to be a credible manager in terms of issues such as the Northern Ireland Protocol?
Well, yes, and on the issue of strikes, obviously people have been seeing them over the last few weeks. They've got weeks stretching ahead of industrial action on the calendar. What is that doing to the government's reputation and Rishi Sunak's image as a Prime Minister in control? Does it look like that is being damaged?
The RCN, clearly one doesn't want to dispute with any part of the NHS. That's a very difficult problem. In terms of judgments for a general election, we're a year and a half, 2 years away from a general election. The other issues, like the railways, etc., we're in a very difficult post-COVID set of circumstances. It's difficult to manage because they're coming all at the same time. But the polls are actually showing an erosion of support, still general support for the trade unions, but an erosion of that support as they run on, and particularly the rail unions striking over Christmas and therefore keeping families apart.
But what about the health strikes, the nurses going out on strike? How difficult is that for Rishi Sunak? And how much has he got the party on board on this? We read in the papers this morning that there are 4 former ministers who are calling for the pay review body, which the government is keen to stress they're following their recommendations.
Yes.
They're saying that you need to go back to them because that's out of date now.
Before I went into the Lords, I used to spend my time negotiating with trade unions on the management side. So I've negotiated with most of the major trade unions over many years. And people from outside the negotiations pontificating about what should be done always used to irritate me. And so I'm not going to start doing it. And I'm talking here about management colleagues who were not involved in the negotiations. Leave it to the negotiators. Leave it, they have to report to the Prime Minister, to the head of the RCN and the like. But it can't go on an excessive length of time because that will stretch the credibility of the Prime Minister because disputes in the NHS are not what any government wants.
Well, yes, and do you think that the government can stick to its current line or is it going to have to shift its position, do you think?
As I say, having spent many years negotiating, the answer is I don't know. It's in the position of looking inwards, it's getting the advice from the negotiators, it's getting the advice from the Health Secretary. They'll make a judgment on a day-by-day basis.
And the general argument is we haven't got the money to give in to these pay demands, but also they're saying if we pay inflation meeting or busting pay rises, that in itself is inflationary. Do you think that message cuts through to the public?
I think in part it cuts through, but not. There is a natural sympathy towards the health service unions, which makes it more difficult to negotiate with. The pay board, which is what the Health Secretary is referring to, very clearly made a recommendation. The people you referred to are saying, well, look at it, it was several months ago, it was pre-invasion of Ukraine, pre-gas prices and the like. So it's going to be a difficult one to tackle. The other trade disputes, the likes of the railways, for example, and civil service, much more easy to deal with. even the rail unions, working from home is so much easier now that actually the impact is far less than it might have been a few years ago.
And what about the impact on Labour of strikes? Rishi Sunak very keen, whenever he can, yes, to paint the unions as being in the control of union barons. He talks about Labour them being unions being Labour's paymasters. I mean, to what extent is that effective, do you think, in trying to shift some of the blame for the strikes off the Tories?
Oh, there's no question that it is the natural tactic of the Conservatives, of the government, is to show the Labour Party in the hands of the union barons. Whether that cuts through heavily or not, I'm not sure. But Keir Starmer's walking a fine line because he said Labour MPs, Labour spokesmen, should not be going on the picket lines. And some have done. And whether they're spokesmen or spokeswomen, they are facing an issue themselves. It's a fine line for both sides, but it's a bigger problem for the government than it is for the opposition.
OK, interesting times indeed. Lord Robert Hayward, always interesting to get your analysis. Thanks very much indeed. Now, the cold weather is set to continue, I'm afraid, with more snow and ice forecast across the country this weekend. Well, Sky's meteorologist Joanna Robinson joins me now. So, Joanna, I thought that milder weather was coming, but it looks like it's going to stay cold for a bit.
It is on its way. It is coming. But yes, certainly for the next few days, we are keeping those cold conditions. It's freezing out here at the moment, down to minus 11.5 degrees Celsius just down the road from me here in Oxfordshire. So a freezing start. And the cold conditions, like I said, are going to continue. Temperatures, you can see here, that's the temperatures at the moment. So way down to -5, -6 in places, -7 as well. So a cold start. But it's not just the cold. We're actually seeing some heavy snow this morning. There's some heavy snow across central parts of Scotland, and that's led the Met Office to issue an amber warning for the area through to midday today. So we could see 5 to 10 centimetres of snow across the central belt of Scotland this morning, perhaps 20 centimetres of snow on higher ground. So there is that warning in place across there. That's there until midday. And I think then the snow across that area will, at low levels, turn back to rain, and the snow mainly confined to higher ground. So that warning's in place there. There's also a wider yellow warning for ice and snow across Scotland, and then also across the Northern Isles as well as a warning of snow and ice until 10 o'clock this morning. So those are the warnings. But elsewhere across the country, we're looking at a mostly fine day. Plenty of sunshine today. There is some early mist and fog around, freezing fog in places, but that will lift through the morning, and there will be plenty of sunshine across the bulk of England and Wales and Ireland. But we will see a few showers moving in across the western parts of Wales, maybe western parts of England as well. And those showers, like I said, across the Northern Isles should fade away. And like I said, the cold conditions are continuing on Saturday, but change on Sunday.
Hello, welcome back. Now, thousands of nurses joined picket lines across England, Wales and Northern Ireland yesterday. And health leaders are concerned that patients will be put at even greater risk when ambulance workers join the industrial action next week. Well, joining me now is NHS doctor Parth Patel, who's also a fellow at the Institute for Public Policy Research. So, very good morning to you. Nice to see you. Thanks so much for coming in. So, nurses walked out yesterday. There's another strike next week in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. You're an A&E doctor. Do you support what the nurses are doing?
Yes, I do. Well, nurses and healthcare workers, sort of more broadly, have seen their pay being eroded over the past decade or so. And over the past year, it's just fallen off a cliff. And sort of that balance between how difficult the job is, which it's become more difficult over the past few years, and sort of what you're remunerated for as a result of it, that mismatch has just grown. And that's what's led to these strikes. We're seeing sort of record levels of quit rates among nurses as well. So that's one option. But for the people who want to continue to be a nurse, they're using pretty much the only voice mechanism they've got left. They've tried other ways, the government hasn't listened, and so now it's about industrial action. And the hope would be that someone will finally respond to what they are saying.
And you're not part of the dispute as a doctor, but what's your reaction when you hear the government say, we can't afford a 19% pay rise, there just isn't the money there, and we're following the advice of the Independent Pay Review Board. What do you make of that argument?
Well, I mean, the government has a pretty simple question it should be asking itself, which is pay in the health service at a level that can maintain services at the level I want them to be, at the level I'm promising, right? And the answer to that, quite plainly, is no. So you have two options. The first option for the government is to come and to sit at the negotiating table and to revise their pay offer, to set pay at a level that fills jobs, to set pay at a level that ensures the NHS performs at a standard that we all expect it to, that the government wants it to. The second option for the government is actually to come out and to talk to voters and to tell the public that actually public services are going to deteriorate, they're going to deteriorate further, and that we need to get used to that. There's a new normal, and that baseline of what we expect from the health service is now lower. Those are the two options for the government. What they're doing right now, which is letting inflation erode wages, but still saying services can be maintained, that, just from an economic perspective, is plainly dishonest.
OK, and they argue that they're putting lots of money into the NHS, don't they? If there isn't a resolution, do you expect to see more strikes to come? The RCN is saying that that is the case. If there aren't negotiations and there isn't progress, we can expect more after the ones next week?
I think that's right. I think there will be more strikes if the government continues with its line. I suspect those strikes that come in January will be more severe and more coordinated and will lead to greater disruptions. So I think, the offer the RCN has made to the government, which is, if you sit at the table, we will suspend the strikes. That feels, I think, to most people like a pretty reasonable offer to have made. But if the government continues to say, no, we're staying hardball, then I suspect the strikes to come will be more disruptive.
What about patient safety? Do you have concerns? You work in A&E yourself. I know you haven't worked this week, so you can't comment on what effect the strike had yesterday. But do you have worries that during strikes, emergency care is compromised?
Right. There's sort of two ways to think about how the strikes affect patient care. There's what it means for patients in the immediate term, what it meant for patients yesterday, what it will mean for patients next Tuesday, next Wednesday. And then there's what it means for patients over the coming months and years. So let's take each of those in turn. What does it mean for patients in the immediate term? Have services been disrupted? Yes. That's almost how the strike works. That's the voice mechanism. The disruption to the normal running of healthcare services is the voice mechanism here. They've been organised in a way to minimise disruption to sort of critical services. So most of the disruptions have happened to outpatient services, to planned care, to non-emergency operations, and sort of certain services like children's emergency services are being staffed at normal levels, A&E services are being staffed at bank holiday levels. So basically it's an effort to mitigate the harms that would come around to patients as a result of disruptions. But disruptions are happening. Access to care is being disrupted. The key thing to remember here, I think, is the counterfactual. So if this industrial action wasn't happening, do we have a health service where safe and timely access to care is the reality? And quite plainly, the answer to that is no, right? And that leads me on to the second point I wanted to make. Well, what's the impact of these strikes for patients in the medium and the long term? Which is, if the industrial action is successful in negotiating a better pay offer for the nurses and for healthcare workers, well, then that will lead to a larger, more satisfied, more productive workforce, which in turn will lead to better quality care and better access to care for patients. So in the long run, this could be in patients' interest, and certainly that's what nurses are arguing.
Of course, and yet people who are in an emergency situation are not going to be thinking about the long term. They think, am I going to get my care now? And there are warnings that next week's ambulance strike could actually be even more compromising as far as patient safety is concerned. Do you have that worry?
I do, yeah. I think the ambulance workers' strikes on Wednesday poses a different sort of risk to patients, and it's quite hard to see how that plays out. Again, they are being planned in a way to try and mitigate the harms that would come around. Ideally, that no one would become severely unwell as a result of not being able to access care, right? So that conversations are going on between unions and between providers to ensure that can happen. It's hard to see how it plays out, and what the unions will argue and what healthcare workers are arguing is that the ball's still very much in the government's court, and they could sit down at the table and suspend these strikes.
OK, well, Dr Parth Patel, very interesting to get your take on the situation. Thanks very much for coming in. Thank you. Now, a new rehabilitation programme could help people with long COVID reduce their symptoms. The study carried out by the University of Leeds involves gradually increasing a patient's physical activity, and it could help some people overcome the devastating effects of the virus. Sky's Shaman Freeman-Powell reports.
Before contracting COVID, Susanna had an active life. She loved ballet, swimming and spending time with her kids. But now, even that's challenging.
I was always running around with the kids. I'd be the mum crawling through soft play, going down the slides. And now I'm the mum who's at home in bed while they're somewhere else without me. And that's really, really hard. And working, I used to work 10-hour shifts, at the hospital on my feet, never sat down in urgent care, worked GP shifts. And I can't even have a conversation for more than about 5 minutes without having to pause and stop. And that's really hard.
Around 2 million people in the UK are currently living with long COVID, and the symptoms can vary from patient to patient. Some may experience extreme tiredness or memory loss. Others are faced with chest pains or even heart palpitations. And because the symptoms are so varied, finding a solution has been difficult. But there may be some cause for cautious optimism, as a new study which supervised patients who gradually paced their activity levels has found it could help with symptoms.
This is interesting because it is giving us hope that even though we've got such a huge burden of long COVID patients who've been struggling for a long time now, a year and a half to 2 years, that there is still hope that even now, if they do the structured pacing sort of protocol, probably longer. I mean, we tested only for 6 weeks.
But this study is limited, and the core of the condition still isn't fully understood.
I've kind of come to a point where I don't know what the future is, and the doctors I trust and respect the most are the ones that openly say that. We don't know. Nobody knows. We can hope, and hope's really important.
But until scientists can figure out the exact cause of long COVID and how to manage it, people like Susanna may have to learn to live with it. Siobhan Freeman-Powell, Sky News.
Now, Sky News analysis has revealed that the government's plans to renovate hundreds of schools is going to cost more than £11 billion. And critics say the project still won't make up for years of underfunding. So let's get a view on this. We can talk to Tim Warnford now, who runs a consultancy group that helps schools to secure financial support. Tim Warnford, very good morning to you. Thanks so much for talking to us. Give us a sense of the scale of the problem, if you like. How badly do schools in this country need renovation?
On an everyday basis, I visit schools where we are in a world of pain. We have structural issues, we have legacy asbestos issues, poor quality toilets. Anyone that wanders around the school will be frankly shocked at the condition in which we find ourselves. It's estimated that, as you say, we're £11.4 billion in backlog funding requirements. That rose from £7 billion only 4 years previously. Despite whatever investment that we make every single year, we don't seem to be able to stay on top of the rates of dilapidation.
So when the government says that they're naming 400 schools that are going to get renovation money, they talk about pledging £19.4 billion of capital funding to support the education sector. Are you saying that's not enough?
I'm saying in our sector, the Cinderella of the government estate portfolio, we actually have 50% of the estates and we're only funded to 15% of that. We welcome every single penny that comes into our sector because we are so desperate for it. Let's talk numbers here. We're talking about 500 schools, which is on the programme, from 22,000 schools which are across our estate. Those 500 schools are due to be constructed over a 10-year period. That's effectively 50 schools per year. Obviously, in 2 years' time, we'll probably be facing a general election. Last time we had a major rebuilding programme, Building Schools for the Future, it was scrapped in 2010. So how many schools from the school rebuilding programme will actually be built before the next general election, and what confidence may the sector have that this will fare any better than previous versions?
And analysis suggests that the most acute need is in the East and West Midlands. Do you see real regional differences?
There will be spikes and there will be troughs. Certain local authorities did invest in their estates far better than others. It's very difficult to say because there will be different materials that will be used. So I think just like anywhere, there will always be pockets where there will be worse condition. Obviously, the government have premised the collection of the East Midlands and West Midlands on their own condition data collection programme data. So that's effectively where they've drawn it from. As someone who basically sees schools everywhere from Cumbria to Cornwall, I see problems in every single local authority, in every single county.
And the Department of Education plans to open up bidding for the 100 other schools in their project. Give us an idea of that process. How does a school pitch for more money for renovation? And are there certain issues concerning a school that get priority over others?
So, as I said, there's 22,000 schools in the UK. 11,000 now are academy schools, half of which of those receive formulaic funding called the school condition allocation. The other 50%, who are basically standalone schools or schools within small trusts, are invited to bid each year for the Condition Improvement Fund. And there is very, very strict guidance criteria from the ESFA, very useful. It produces a hierarchy of need. So from a school perspective, it will be the projects which are most likely to be funded will be in relation to risk, so risk to life, so things like asbestos, safeguarding, Legionella, etc. Then there will be risk to school closure. So if your boiler isn't working and there's no hot water, the school faces not opening. So there will be different levels of criteria, whereas the school rebuilding programme is very much premised, as I said, on the previous data that's been collected by the government through their CDCs. Again, the qualifying criteria was less clear in terms of the actual bids for school rebuilding programme. Schools were able to nominate themselves and did not necessarily have to formulate a separate bid. They would receive survey visits from the ESFA or from their partners.
What about what head teachers tell you? How important is it? It's not just about the physical look of a school, obviously. What do they say about the impact it has on pupils and their ability to learn? Did they say that it has a manifest effect?
Well, of course. I mean, we surely strive to basically ensure that we have a fit-for-purpose teaching and learning environment, and it's very difficult for disruption to the core curriculum when you've got a leaking ceiling and children have to be decanted from one room to another. It's bound to have a disruptive effect. It's also bound to have a disruptive effect in terms of staff retention and attracting staff to a school, which is effectively not at its best. It's a way of hemorrhaging staff and of pupils, basically.
OK, well, Tim Warnford, thanks very much indeed for talking us through your experience of schools around the country. We appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now then, let's find out what the weather's doing and how long it's going to stay this cold.
Anticipation is rising, and so is the atmosphere. Are you ready? The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the weekend will eventually bring change, but for now, Arctic air remains in place. The Met Office has snow and ice warnings for parts of the north today, with an amber warning of heavy snow for the central belt of Scotland until midday. Disruption is likely. It's a very cold start with a widespread severe frost and some patchy freezing fog. Central Scotland will see outbreaks of snow this morning, but the snow should turn to sleet or rain at lower levels later. Patchy rain or sleet is more likely over northwest Ireland. Most other places will stay fine once fog lifts, but there'll be wintry showers for the Northern Isles and some Irish sea coasts.